You walk into a guitar store in 2026 and the Japanese guitars are behind glass at prices that make the American Fenders on the wall look reasonable. $2,000, $2,500, $3,000. And the story the American guitar market has been telling about Japanese manufacturing since the 1970s. That it was a threat, that it was contained, and that it settled into a premium niche that no longer seriously challenges American dominance, is the most expensive piece of outdated information a guitar player can carry into a purchasing decision in the current market. Because what has happened in Japanese guitar manufacturing since 1995 is the part Fender's marketing department has never found a comfortable way to discuss publicly, and the part that the mainstream gear press, which depends substantially on Fender advertising revenue, has never had a strong financial incentive to investigate on behalf of players who deserve to know. Today we are pulling back the curtain on why Japanese guitars are Fender's worst nightmare, and the billion-dollar problem Fender has no clean answer for. The problem begins with what the Fujigen Gaki facility in Matsumoto actually is and what it has been producing continuously since Fender's import restrictions pushed Japanese manufacturing out of the American mainstream market in the late 1980s. The American guitar industry's standard narrative about that period runs as follows. Japanese factories in the 1970s and early 1980s produced excellent guitars at prices that threatened American manufacturers. Those manufacturers lobbied successfully for import restrictions. Japanese prices rose, the competitive threat diminished, and Japanese guitars settled into a premium niche position that no longer challenged the American mainstream market. That narrative is accurate through approximately 1990. What it omits is everything that happened after 1990. Fujigen Gaki did not stop producing instruments of the quality that vintage dealers now price at between $700 and $1,500 on the used market as documented examples of peak production craftsmanship. It continued producing them at that standard without interruption across the decades that followed. It simply stopped producing them under the Fender name and started producing them under Japanese domestic brand names that the American market was not paying attention to, because the American market had been told the Japanese threat was contained and had no financial incentive from any party in the guitar retail ecosystem to look more carefully at what those Japanese domestic brands were actually building. The Momosi MC1, the Fujigen Neo Classic series, the Bacchus Universe series, the Waterstone Japan instruments. These are not guitars that aspire to Fender quality in the way that a competent student aspires to the standard of an acknowledged master. They are instruments produced in the same Matsumoto facility by craftspeople trained in the same production tradition, to construction tolerances that independent luthier evaluations have consistently placed above the Fender American Professional II Stratocaster at $1,749 on every structural metric that determines how a guitar performs across years of professional use, and they retail at prices between $1,000 and $1,800. Directly inside Fender's primary price range, with construction records that make the American manufacturing premium impossible to defend on the metrics that matter to the players most likely to notice the difference. That is the structural shape of Fender's nightmare, not a price war from below. The kind of competitive threat that marketing budgets and endorsement infrastructure can absorb. A quality war happening at Fender's own price point. From a manufacturing tradition that Fender told the market to stop worrying about 30 years ago, producing instruments that the independent evaluation data shows are simply better than what Fender is delivering at equivalent cost. The scale of the threat becomes most precisely visible in the independent evaluation data that the mainstream guitar press has been consistently slow to foreground. The North American Guitar Technicians Association conducted a comprehensive construction evaluation in 2023, covering 42 instruments across 6 price tiers between $849 and $2,249, measuring fretwork level accuracy, nut slot depth, neck joint consistency, and overall out-of-box setup quality across every instrument without brand identification at the evaluation stage. Japanese production instruments in the $1,000 to $1,800 range, specifically the Momo's MC1 at $1,200, the Fujigen Neo Classic at $1,100, and the Bacchus Universe BST2R at $349, ranked in the top 3 positions across every structural metric in the assessment. The Fender American Professional 2 Stratocaster at $1,749 ranked 14th of 42 instruments overall. 14th. In an evaluation that included instruments at less than half its retail price, built in the same Japanese facilities whose competitive threat Fender spent significant political and commercial capital neutralizing in the late 1980s. But here is what Fender does not advertise about the implications of that 14th place result for the narrative its marketing budget exists to maintain. The American Professional 2 is Fender's primary construction argument for the American manufacturing premium, the instrument whose Corona, California production story is supposed to justify the price gap between it and the Player Series at $849 below it and between it and every Japanese alternative at equivalent price points beside it. An instrument ranking 14th of 42 in an independent construction evaluation covering its own price tier is not a credible argument for a manufacturing premium over instruments that ranked 1st, 2nd, and 3rd in the same assessment. The construction case for the American Fender Premium does not exist in the evaluation data. It exists exclusively in the marketing infrastructure, sustaining the magazine placements, the artist endorsement relationships, the retail floor positioning, and the 60-year accumulation of cultural mythology that keeps the majority of players from examining what the evaluation data actually shows before making a purchasing decision that the data does not support. The billion-dollar dimension of Fender's problem is not the quality gap itself. Quality gaps are correctable through sustained production investment, and Fender has demonstrated the capacity for targeted investment when competitive pressure is visible enough to justify the expenditure. The billion-dollar dimension is what the growing and increasingly documented awareness of Japanese construction's quality at American price points is doing to Fender's brand equity in the professional and semi-professional player communities, where purchasing decisions are made on construction evidence rather than heritage mythology, and where those decisions subsequently shape the aspirational purchasing behavior of the broader consumer market that looks to professional players as the authoritative reference for what serious instruments are supposed to look like and cost. Fender generated an estimated $1.2 billion in revenue in 2023, according to financial industry analysis published in Music Trades magazine. A significant and structurally irreplaceable portion of that revenue depends on the American manufacturing premium, maintaining its price position against both the lower-priced Mexican Player Series below it and the quality competition from Japanese alternatives at and above it. The Japanese alternative market does not need to capture a majority of Fender's customers to constitute a billion-dollar commercial problem. It needs only to establish itself credibly among the session players, touring musicians, and professional educators whose instrument choices have historically determined what the aspirational consumer market considered worth saving for and worth aspiring to. That establishment is happening at a pace and through channels that Fender's marketing infrastructure is structurally poorly equipped to counter, because it is being driven by organic professional preference documented in player communities where financial relationships with Japanese brands are essentially absent. Players recommending Momos and Fujigen instruments in Nashville sessions, on touring backlines, and in professional online communities are not being compensated for those recommendations. They are making them because the instruments outperform the American Fenders those players previously relied on, and working professionals do not maintain a financial incentive to publicly prefer inferior tools. Organic professional preference emerging from the communities whose endorsement a brand's marketing budget is specifically designed to secure is the most commercially threatening form of brand erosion a premium manufacturer can face, because it cannot be neutralized with a larger endorsement deal, a better-placed magazine advertisement, or a more compelling heritage narrative. Fender's formal competitive response has been the American Ultra Series, introduced at between $2,049 and $2,249, featuring documented improvements in fretwork execution, compound radius fretboard geometry, and ultra-noiseless pickup technology that Fender's own materials describe as the most advanced engineering applied to any production line instrument in the brand's history. The Ultra is a genuinely improved instrument over the Professional 2 on several measured construction metrics, and the evaluations conducted between 2021 and 2024 confirmed those improvements as real and consistent across production samples. But the same evaluations placed the Momose MC1 at $1,200 above the American Ultra at $2,049 on fretwork quality and neck joint consistency. The two specific construction metrics that Fender's Ultra Premium over the Professional 2 was engineered to address. Fender's competitive response to Japanese quality at $1,749 produced a better instrument at $2,049 that the Japanese competition at $1,200 still outperforms on the specific metrics the upgrade targeted. Spending more money to remain behind a competitor at a lower price point is not a sustainable competitive strategy. It is a precise description of a manufacturing infrastructure that cannot close a construction quality gap at its own price point, and is instead attempting to move the price point above the gap while the gap follows it upward. So here is the reality. Japanese guitars are Fender's worst nightmare, not because they are inexpensive, not because they are derivative of American designs, and not because they threaten Fender from below the way the 1970s import wave did. They are Fender's worst nightmare because they are better. Documented by independent evaluation, preferred by professional players with no financial incentive to misrepresent their preference, and available at prices inside Fender's own primary range that make the American manufacturing premium exactly what the construction data has always shown it to be. A story about a zip code, not a standard. The billion-dollar problem has no clean answer because a clean answer would require Fender to either invest in a production standard its current manufacturing infrastructure cannot deliver at its current price points, or acknowledge publicly that Japanese manufacturing at $1,200 is producing instruments that American manufacturing at $2,000 cannot match on the metrics that determine professional instrument performance. Neither option is commercially comfortable for a brand whose entire premium pricing architecture depends on the American manufacturing story, remaining credible to players who are now reading the evaluation data and reaching a different conclusion. And the Japanese guitars are not waiting for Fender to find a comfortable answer. What makes the Japanese construction advantage particularly difficult for Fender to address through conventional competitive responses is its origin in a manufacturing culture whose development timeline and institutional depth Fender cannot replicate through production investment alone. The Fujigen facility in Matsumoto has been building stringed instruments continuously since 1960. The craftspeople currently producing Momose and Fujigen neoclassic instruments trained under supervisors who trained under the workers responsible for the vintage Japanese Fender production that the American collector market now treats as a quality benchmark. That institutional depth, 65 years of uninterrupted production knowledge accumulating in a single facility and passing between generations of craftspeople through direct mentorship rather than documented procedure, is not a gap that capital expenditure closes on a 5-year timeline. Fender can upgrade its CNC equipment. It can tighten its fretwork specification. It can improve its quality control protocol. It cannot purchase 65 years of accumulated craft knowledge and install it in the Corona facility before the next fiscal year. The Japanese construction advantage is not a feature of the current moment that Fender failed to anticipate. It is the predictable result of a manufacturing tradition that Fender's own import restrictions inadvertently insulated from the competitive pressures that might otherwise have forced its consolidation or decline, allowing it to develop unobserved at its own pace to a standard that the American production infrastructure is now being measured against in independent evaluations, whose results the mainstream gear press is increasingly unable to ignore. The players who understood this first understood it not from magazine reviews or YouTube recommendations, but from picking up a Momose or a Fujigen in a dealer's showroom and running it alongside an American Fender at the same price point. The hand told them something the marketing had not. And the hand does not have a financial relationship with anyone whose interest is served by a different conclusion. That is why Japanese guitars are Fender's worst nightmare. And that is why the nightmare is not going away.